aware of. It's all about running a background JavaScript thread within your application that actually is independent of the tab, the window, and even independent of the browser being running in the first place. You can actually, this background thread can mediate the connections between your web application and the server. So the idea is that it becomes the way that people will build applications that work offline, both on mobile devices and other types of devices as well. That's super smart. It's something that we really needed, and we're already seeing it deployed in early versions of Chrome and Mozilla, and it's on the Microsoft feature list as well. And then I think the other, along with that, we also have Push API, which is enabling push messages to be sent directly to the user that can engage them into a web session. That's something that's been missing from the web platform. And then I think the smartest technologies that are coming down at us are around web components, really. And because web components, the web components platform has the promise of enabling much faster rate of innovation on the web platform, where developers themselves work on the new custom tags and the new technologies that they want. It's been called polyfills up until now, but the promise of web components is to make polyfills and an ecosystem around polyfills part of the web platform, and I think that's super smart as well.
Okay, so this is our specialist opinion. Does anybody else have a different opinion or want to add something about that specialist? Okay. Then the next question I have for you is, how do you think that semantics will be included in the future web applications? So Daniel, you told us you were working with emergency.
Yes. So I think the web of data is an important and integral part of the web platform. I think it's no understatement to say, though, that the focus these days in the web standards community is on the browser-centric web, really, and more. So a lot of the technologies that I've talked about are all APIs. They're based on an assumption of JavaScript. They're based on the browser platform and thinking about the web from the browser perspective. At the same time, within the tag group, we have had a lot of focus also on semantic technologies and the semantic web application kind of architecture. Where those two things meet is the URL, right? Because and we got into a big debate at our last tag meeting about the move to HTTPS, because of course Tim is worried that with all the URLs that are being passed around in semantic web applications, and suddenly all of those will no longer work because we're moving to HTTPS. So that the semantic web thinking is driving some of the discussions, and I hope that it's going to drive more as we move into more open data, and as the role of data on the web becomes more and more important. We're seeing a rise in interest in that topic. But I think that the focus right now, from my perspective, is more on making the browser-centric web better and shoring up the problems that it has.
What about the other panelists?
Yeah, so in regard to the semantics, I would say that it's very much important. I mean, from my perspective, I would say that there's lots of things that need to be taken care of in regard to what will happen next with what will be, as my colleague here also said, that as web is moving into the data management and more into a cloud storage, we will have certain challenges on our hands. Will it be APIs, public APIs? Will it be dedicated applications that will work for a certain domain, or a certain aspect of what the users are interested in? That's something that I'm not very sure about. From my perspective, I would say that the technologies, the semantic web technology, is very useful at the moment. It's going to be useful in the same domains it's currently used.
Not very much into semantic web, but I would like to ask Daniel if he has an opinion on how is semantic web going to develop, considering privacy concerns.
So first of all, there was something that I should have mentioned, which is that I think one of the most interesting things that's happening with semantic web and the web of data are things like the initiatives like the Open Data Institute. If you're unfamiliar with the Open Data Institute, just type that into your favorite search engine and find out about them. But they are supporting initiatives around open data, which most often means structured data and very often means using semantic web technologies. But not only that, but they are incubating businesses, startups, that are actually using this technology, that are building their businesses around these technologies. And so that is where I expect the really interesting stuff to be happening, because my impression of the semantic web community is that there's an enormous bunch of technology that's been built. A lot of it has been very much in academia, and I'm very excited to see that coming over into the more entrepreneurial space where startups are starting to build stuff on top of it. Now, in terms of the question about security and privacy, a lot of the assumptions about open data, so when we talk about open data in a semantic web context, the assumption is that it's that it is not private data, that it's not personal data, it's not personally identifiable data. You still run into the question of, well, depending on what data sets you access, that might say something about you, right? And I think that's still somewhere where we need to apply the same thinking around HTTPS. So I think but I don't have a plan for that right now, and I don't know of one yet. So it's a good question.
Maybe we should rely on ethics more than other stuff.
That hasn't proved historically like a good idea. But on that point, a lot of people are saying that we should have more regulation, that maybe regulation, such as regulation of what you can and cannot do with data, such as European privacy laws, can be a good way to encourage or to discourage bad uses of data. And, it can go hand in hand with revising the platform, making the platform itself more secure.
And now some questions about your personal experience, if you'd like. And if anybody has any questions, or then I will ask. So, how can you tell us about some standards, some new standards and new technologies that you wanted to adopt, and what were the challenges you faced when trying to adopt them in the development of your product?
Yeah, so the disadvantage of being the first. So about, let me think, about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a discussion with one of our clients that he wants to move everything into the cloud. And he was like, okay, he heard the cloud buzzword, and he was like, okay, which one do we choose? There was a very long discussion about this. How do we move a large financial system into the cloud? At that moment, Azure wasn't a very good choice I would say, but it was the only choice. The experience was not that good, I would say. So, it being a financial application, it was handling a lot of data, hundreds of gigabytes of data. It being a financial application, it was private data. It being a financial application, it had intellectual property in it. So you would go through all those discussions about technically if it's feasible or not, legally if it's okay or not, which data center do you choose, US-based one, another country-based one, what are the local laws, how do you ensure that the intellectual property does not go out the window, how do you ensure the security also of the data that is being put in there, what constraints does the cloud have, and at that moment the cloud had pretty big constraints if you ask me. One of the simple technical issues was that the database shouldn't be larger than 50 gigabytes. It changed since then. We had several discussions even with Microsoft, and they weren't providing solutions for that. So we've had a couple of challenges on our hands, and it wasn't only technical. There weren't only technical challenges. I think that from that perspective, the Azure cloud has evolved, so it changed a lot in the meantime. If you would ask now if we want to move the application to the cloud, I would say yes, but the effort technically would take the same amount of time that it should have taken at that time. So as a conclusion, we didn't move to cloud because of all of those challenges. The data had to be secured in such a way that the client should have been 100% sure that it wasn't leaving the cloud. And I'm curious if anyone can assume that risk at any point in time. And that was one of the biggest challenges that we had.
Okay, a couple of years ago, the company I work for and Zino I work in, we had to come up with a solution for migrating some of our Silverlight clients to something else because Microsoft was not supporting Silverlight anymore, so we pretty much had enough what was given to us to solve this problem, come up with a solution, and we came up with a single page application. And the first challenge was to choose a framework where we would develop this, and we spent like 2 weeks on developing a prototype, and we had to decide between a few of them, and eventually we chose Angular, and I guess now when I look back, the main reason which we chose is this one because it's backed by Google. And it seems that we had a good path because back then it wasn't that popular as it is now. And now we face another challenge, Angular 2.0, which as we've heard isn't backwards compatible, so that's another challenge which we face. And along the way we had to build by ourselves a lot of components, because now when I start and look up for a component which we already have, which we build ourselves, I see there are a lot of variants already built by some other guys. So those was, well, still we use our own, so but it depends on the component and if we trust it or not. So we're still going to have a lot of challenges in this course.
Just a quick question on that. Does IPR concern you, or does the IPR concern the client, or was IPR, intellectual property rights?
We have a product, our own product, which we sell, so it doesn't really concern us at this point.
So challenges. I mean, racking my brain, trying to think of what the right anecdote might be. I think it's worth talking about how, so I've been, as I mentioned earlier, I've been working with Mozilla quite a lot on the Firefox OS project. I think that the vision of Firefox OS is, hey, could we build a web-based phone? Could we build a phone where every application that you use is, including the dialer, including the contacts, that kind of thing, is just a web application. And that in order to build applications for the phone, you build just a web application. And I think it's a great vision, and it's something that I've been chasing after for a while, actually, in different projects. So I think the Firefox OS has become the best example of that vision brought to life. One of the challenges that I think we faced is that initially, anyway, the whole project chased after the existing goals of the existing mobile ecosystems too much. So we thought we put up a Mozilla, well, we didn't put it up, but Mozilla put up an app store, and we, in the developer ecosystem, from a developer ecosystem point of view, we spent a lot of time talking about how developers could build apps and put them into the store, and how they could monetize their apps and that kind of thing, and a lot of the same kind of language that you hear in the app developer community, and that was very deliberate. It was about trying to mimic the existing way that people think, the existing intellectual model around development, and I think that was a mistake, and I think that the whole group of people that's working on this, and it's really a consortium between Mozilla and a bunch of operators and some equipment manufacturers as well, we're moving back more towards a web-based model, and the idea, trying to make it more true that as a developer you can build a web application, a responsive web application, and your expectation should be that it just works on Firefox OS, that it just works on Chrome, on Android, that you build from a developer perspective. You should not be thinking about building for Firefox OS. You should be thinking about building for web. But that's a very slippery topic when you talk to app developers. So this is something that it's still a challenge that we're grappling with, but we are definitely moving more back towards the web purist kind of point of view, which is embracing what the web is good at in terms of discovery, in terms of shareability, linkability, all that kind of stuff.
Now I have a question for both the specialists and for the public. If next year you will be invited to attend the DevTalks again, what do you think the main subjects will be regarding the future web?
So HTTP is a protocol coming back to life, because currently it's not used as a protocol.
Firstly, I'd like to hear about Angular 2.0.
Do you think you will be able to present to us?
I don't know, sure hope so.
Do you think you will get enough knowledge
We'll see.
next year?
We'll see.
Okay.
HTTP 2, because it seems we need that, and web components.
So I'm going to go back to service worker. I just think service worker is going to be one of the most important specs. We're going to think about the web as a pre-service worker and post-service worker web. Once service worker is out there and deployed reliably, people are going to start building their applications based around this service worker model. It's going to change the way that people develop and think about web and think about using web applications as well. So I think, and I would like to think that by next year we're going to have enough stable deployments content on that, and I'd be happy to provide it.
So any questions from the audience about this topic? Okay. At the meeting this morning, at the session this morning, Dan told us that he doesn't believe in separating the front-end developer and the back-end developer. Do you think in the future they won't be separated, or do you think it's a good solution to keep them separated?
So yes and no. I mean, the answer is it depends. There's always going to be applications that are more UI intensive, and there's always going to be applications that are more backend intensive. If you ask me, coming from the financial industry, I would say it's almost always the case where they are more backend intensive. I'm not saying that UI isn't a good solution, but it would be interesting how we would see algorithms or intellectual property developed by the client put into a web browser. So that would be a challenge. Separating them, yes, I would separate them, because technically you would get to a point with minimum effort where you will have the most knowledge to resolve some sort of problems and some sort of technical challenges. But from that point on, there will be a need for a specialist. So you will get to certain problems with Angular, with whatever UI framework you can think of, and only somebody that knows very well that framework will be capable of doing that. And it's the same case with the backend developer. So currently, as I see in financial applications, most of the systems are split between UI, middle tiers, and backend systems, databases, and other stuff. And it will always be a case where some people will like more middle tiers or backends, and some guys will like more UIs. So yeah, I will split them, but it depends.
I think ideally we would want that all developers are full-stack developers. But of course, that some of us know better or like better the stuff which goes in the back end, all the stuff which is in the front end. But even that, I think that everybody should know, at least at a higher level, how everything works altogether. And for sure, we're going to need specialists. Going further, I think Dan, this morning, when he said about full-stack developers, he went a bit beyond the fact that we have developers who work in back end or developers who work on the front end. He outlined the fact that we want developers who also can do sales or marketing or design or whatever, so that when they're putting in front of a problem, let's say in his example was like a startup, then you can have like a bunch of people who can pretty much do anything which a startup needs. So when he meant a full stack, he went further than just UI or backend, and also the other stuff which you need.
Would you do that? Would you like to be a full stack developer?
Yes.
Yes, but no?
But I think it's hard to just say, yeah, full stack developer. It's always stuff which you need to work on. But still, I think you should have one thing which you're really good at, a specialty, something which you're a specialist on.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think it's about product focus as well. It's about everybody in the team understanding what the product is that you're developing and being passionate about that. Right, passionate is kind of a buzzword, but about delivering that product. And you know, I like the anecdote about that somebody gave earlier about sitting on the support line for a day and the developers who sit on the support, who answer the support question for a day, can then go back and help to inject energy into the development team by saying, hey, we're really going to fix this problem. And that is the kind of thinking that I like, that I think is highlighted by Dan's talk, that we need to think about, which I think is really, I really support that. From just thinking about web components for a second, the whole idea behind web components is, or the ethos maybe, is that you have certain people that are building these web components, and then other people that are maybe, they're not, maybe they're more consumers of web components, they're still developers, and I think that implies some kind of separation of concerns or separation of thinking. I think ideally the people that are building those web components are building them to fit a specific need, and they're not just building them in a vacuum, but then you might amplify that, the energy that goes into building that web component by allowing more people than just that one developer to use it. So I think that's also a kind of separation of powers, and could make web developer lives easier by being able to leverage the work of these component developers. That already happens with polyfills, right? So it's just a kind of elaboration of that.
So, unless there are any other questions from the audience, I would like to address you the last question of the panel. And that would be if you could give us an advice of how to do smart web.
So, I'm going to go a little bit into management, let's say, from the management's point of view. Summarizing a little bit the answers on questions that have already been asked. I would say that there's always going to be cases, and especially from the perspective of what is needed on certain projects, there's always going to be cases where there's technical-oriented people needed for developing the applications. There's always going to be some sort of layering within the application. But as far as I can advise any of you is that smart means that you can respond on a fast pace to a request that has business value. If you want to deliver something valuable to anyone, even it being a client or your colleague or whoever, you have to be responsive in a smart way. And what that means is that you have to have three components in your skill set. One being technical, the other one being the business, understand the viewpoint of the other, and the third one would be the management. How do you do your time management? How do you do your involvement in that larger issue, understanding the bigger picture of what is going on there? Because responding to a single technical problem might be very useful now, but then it will be a challenge to integrate it. And doing smart web is not necessarily far from what I've said, from my point of view, is tackling those problems from all three perspectives and understanding what the client wants, what the product wants, what the user wants from you, and putting that into context in your technical experience that you have. Choosing the technology might be the smallest issue that you have.
I think one takeaway which we could all have from this talk and from what we've heard earlier is that us as developers, we should be more involved into bringing as much business value as we want from our products and actually care more about the products and not focusing 100% or even more than that into technical details. That would be one. And the second is that if we do implement something which we are really proud of, and we say that we did the best job and it's really awesome, we shouldn't get emotionally involved in that. And what I want to say by that is that maybe after 2 weeks, or even less, or maybe more, we figure out that in fact the client doesn't want that, or it's just too late for delivering that. So you should just scrape it away and start over with no hard feelings or anything like that.
A lot of ideas come to mind. One is around testing and the real important need for testing, especially when we talk about when you're building any kind of responsive application, to be actually testing on real devices, and understanding what devices are needed from a business perspective, right? Because it depends largely on what kind of customers you're going after. And the value of actually testing on real devices with real people, doing real user testing, where you set somebody down in front of the application that you built was a naive user, and seeing what they do cannot be overemphasized. That's more smarts in the development process. I would say that the other adjunct to that is to think about edge cases. I've seen so many products built that achieve a really high level of mediocrity because, which is not a good thing, because they ignore edge cases, or they think, oh, well, that's an edge case, we don't need to worry about that. But it happened to be the edge case that would have brought their product or their service from being usable into being kind of more delightful, right? Like that it provides that extra spark and gets more people using it and gives virality to products. One other thing that I would like to emphasize, coming back to the standards side of things, which I would like to see a smarter feedback loop happening between the developer community who are using the standards and the specifications and the engineers who are working on the back end within the browser makers and within the standards organizations, and very often within both of those types of organizations or other types of organizations like mine, to actually build the standards, right? And we need a feedback loop, and very often that feedback loop is, I tried to use this and it didn't work for my, if you try and use a spec and it doesn't work for your particular use case, you might throw it out the window. But think about, instead of just, think about taking the extra time to find out who built that spec and feedback. If you visit the W3C page for that specification, for instance, if it's a W3C spec, then very often it will point to the GitHub repository where there's an issues list. Don't be afraid to put an issue on that issues list and say, this didn't work, it's not, or either didn't work as specified, or the specification is crap because it needs this extra feature. And that's the most valuable feedback that a spec developer can get, is direct feedback from the field, so to speak, of web developers that are working on real applications. And I really encourage people to get into that habit of thinking about leaving that kind of feedback.
Thank you. So, still no questions? Okay, then I want to...
There is one.
So I think that the questions were put very well if I answered all your questions.
I have a question ever since I heard the idea of a developer answering concerns or bug fixes, support, whatever. I really don't see the connection. As a developer, if my product owner, team leader, what you want to call him, says, from now on you're going to work on bug fixes for 6 months, I work on bug fixes. If he says you're going to work on features, I'm going to work on features. It's his responsibility to put the priorities straight, to say we are going to work focusing on features or focusing on bugs. I don't see how it's my responsibility as a developer to say, no, the bugs are too many, no, the features are too... I really don't understand why should I be interested in that since it's not my department. As a developer, I shouldn't have to worry about that. That's my view, and I don't understand why I should be focused on that.
I think you should challenge it first when you're given a task, whether it's feature or bug, so you can see beyond why you are developing a certain thing in the app. It's not like, of course, the product owner, whoever is a stakeholder or a main stakeholder in the product is taking the big decisions, but for me at least as a developer, I want to understand why is that needed. I'm not just going to go and develop it without caring whatever I'm doing this for, or just like a robot who just gets to do what he's told to do. So by what I said before is that everybody who's involved in the product development should care and should know why stuff is being built.
I was just going to add, isn't that part of Agile, right? And when we do Agile and implement Agile and think Agile, I think incorporating some of that thinking, if your organization thinks that they do Agile, but they're not encouraging developers to participate in a more creative way within that process to help prioritize, then that's not Agile. It's so that I think needs to be challenged. Agile orthodoxy.
So just a quick comment on that, because I think we're challenging that every day, most of us. Agile as a principle has a basis that maybe Scrum as a methodology doesn't emphasize it. And Agile as a principle, as a concept, has the following principle. It says that your product is subjected to change. And that is something that some product owners might forget about. And as a developer, I am very interested in what's the final purpose of what I'm developing, how it is going to be used, and why do I need to develop it, as Mihai said. So I'm very keen into understanding why am I developing that, and what's the purpose of it. And I challenge it. Most of the times I challenge it, even to the client.
So thank you, speakers, for attending the panel, and thank you for the audience. And now I'd like to invite you to the coffee break, where we can continue the discussion.